In his recent book called What Jesus Learned from Women, author James McGrath states a recurring challenge within our biblical tradition: the fact that women's names are generally not included in the Scriptures when men's names tend to be, and the fact that these texts appear all to have been written by men, are unfortunately details that some readers fail to notice or consider significant. Here in our fourth installment of this Bible study series called Fathers and Daughters, however, we explore the ending of the book of Job, where surprisingly the author, according to the Interpreter's Bible Commentary, appears to be exceptionally pro-feminist. Why? Because the daughters of Job figure much more prominently in this scene than do the sons, including the rather unusual detail of remembering them by name. Chapter 42 in the rather lengthy book of Job is traditionally referred to as an epilogue. It's the original ending of the short but famous story told back in chapters 1 and 2, in which a legendary character named Job, wealthy and morally upright, loses everything in life, yet faithfully refuses to curse God despite the urging of some of the people closest to him. I often say that the book of Job is kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Everybody knows that movie. There's a short, completely self-contained story told in the black and white portions of that film, right? The beginning and the end. But in the extended middle portion of the movie, we linger in the colorful somewhere over the rainbow land of Oz. Well, similarly, the book of Job has two parts: the ancient, highly moralistic legend shared in prose writing in chapters 1 and 2 and 42, and then the lengthy, poetic, rather whiny, much later written speeches in chapters 3 through 41. Now we're going to leave that middle section aside as we study just the epilogue, the original ending, chapter 42, what a footnote in the New Oxford Bible Commentary calls a naive narrative of the folktale world. Here, the exemplary Job, after grave tragedy, had his fortunes restored by the Lord, verse 10, once he had prayed for his misguided friends. The Lord accepted his prayers and blessed him with even more than he had before. In fact, in a striking echo of Exodus 22, verse 4, where the guilty thief has to repay his victim double what he stole, now, Job's farm has twice the livestock he had back in chapter 1. All of his neighbors who had known him before, verse 11, came to visit, bringing bread and money and a ring of gold, symbols of courtesy and friendship, says the Interpreter's Commentary. But most importantly, the threefold restoration, including not only friends and property, but also family. 7 sons and 3 daughters, verse 13. Now, the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary admits the awkwardness of this piece of the story. It's a bit preposterous to think that the dead, beloved children of chapter 1, it says, are simply replaced by new ones in chapter 42. Nevertheless, the gift of a new family is the high mark of this ancient primitive tale. And what's interesting, for our study at least, is the author's emphasis not on the boys, as you might expect, but on the girls. Jemima, whose name means something like turtle dove. Cassia, whose name evokes the sweet aroma of cinnamon. And Karen Hapak, the name of a shadowy cosmetic used by women like mascara for the eyes. These 3 names celebrating the human senses of sound and fragrance and sight. The Anchor Bible Commentary says the names of Job's daughters represent natural, feminine, physical, and spiritual charms, enhanced by the perfumer's and beautician's art. In all the land, there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, verse 15. John Wesley balked a little bit at this unreserved emphasis on the physicality of these girls. In the Old Testament, he says in his commentary on Job, we often find women praised for their beauty, but never in the New, because the beauty of holiness is brought to much clearer light in the gospel. Far less predictable in the ancient world of the Job fable is the announcement, quote, that their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers, verse 15. Despite the fact that we've studied that same dynamic back in lesson 2 of this series, the daughters of Zelophehad, understand that this is a most unusual practice in the biblical world. One source comments that perhaps Job's suffering has made him more sensitive to the plight of those normally powerless. The Harper's Bible commentary mentions a more granular reality. The emphasis on the beauty and the wealth implies that Job will far more easily find husbands for them. A surplus of girls, confesses the Anchor Bible, would normally be regarded as a calamity. But not in this case. The gifting of these daughters, along with their brothers, indicates a new world order, the emergence of a joyful and harmonious society, one commentator says. These women marry and have children. Job was blessed by seeing not only his children's children, the normal blessing of Psalm 128, verse 6, but his great-grandchildren as well. 4 generations, the blessing of 2 lifetimes. A piece of intertestamental literature called the Testament of Job embellishes upon the ancient biblical text, notably describing across 4 chapters the novelty of these daughters and their beauty and their worthiness of an inheritance, and in the case of one of them, her spiritual insight and the angelic quality of her singing voice. And one final note. While the biblical text ends by saying, and Job died, old and full of days, verse 17. This intertestamental source imagines a heavenly reunion for Job with all of his children, his first family, and his restored family. Does the writer evoke a belief in survival beyond death, wonders Peake's commentary on the Bible, and so intimate lightly that perhaps Job's family, like his fortune, was doubled as well? A hint of resurrection theology, perhaps, like Job 19, verse 25, I know my Redeemer lives. And curiously, the testament of Job ends with this line, and thus it is written that he will rise up again with those whom the Lord raises up. 3 women of Jewish antiquity, profoundly, carefully, thoughtfully remembered by name. Dave Felker, who in retirement pastors our Salem United Methodist Church in Danielsville, will talk a bit about his daughter, Rebecca, Dave and Ruth Ann's only child, and how her presence and her name celebrate the completeness, the fulfillment of this particular family unit. Not without the daughters. Our hero, Job, lived a wonderful life and died old and full of days.
Job 42, verses 12 through 17. The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named the first Jemimah, the second Keziah, and the third Karen-Hapuk. In all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his children's children, 4 generations. And Job died, old and full of days.
Job, a man beaten down and then raised up. Job, a man who understood what it meant to be saved through the grace of God. Job, a man who gave thanks through the recognition of naming his daughters and providing them an inheritance. But of course, I was struck by the fact that the writer of the book of Job only named his daughters and not his sons. Why could that be? Since daughters were usually the absent member of the family. In the earlier account of the family of Job, the names of none of the children are mentioned, and in this account, the names of only the daughters are mentioned. Why the names are mentioned is not explained. But it seems the naming is important to Job as to how his daughters contributed greatly to the happiness of him in his return to prosperity, and they were among the chief blessings which provide happiness to him in his old age. I'm just speculating here, but the writer of Job realized that the use of the daughters and the naming of them would be represented the true feelings of Job in the fact that he now had a new family and that he was raised up out of nothing into a man of prosperity. And just what were their names, and how did these names contribute to Job's happiness? In Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, he writes, he called the one Jemima because her beauty was as the day. The other he called Cassia because she was precious like the cassia, an aromatic herb of great value. And another he called Karen Hapuk because great was the brightness of the glory of her countenance, as the emerald. One would think that these names represented for Job his present state of life. He had gone from losing all he had to a new day of life, a life that was precious to him, and he had all his life's desires, and in return he would live the remainder of his life in a new brightness of glory given to him through God's grace. Are names important even yet today? I believe they are. In fact, I would like to share my wife Ruth Ann and my personal journey that involves a name and the beginning of a new family structure, although not like Job's family, but a new family structure in any event. Upon my return from the Far East, in particular Vietnam and Korea, I was struck with the plight of many of the children in both of these countries, many orphans and others living in conditions which were quite deplorable. After several years of marriage, I began a conversation with Ruth Ann about the possibility of adopting a child from either of these countries. We had no biological children of our own and probably would not. We began the long and arduous and sometimes frustrating process of adoption from a foreign country. We found that Korea was the easiest country from which to adopt, but there were still several pitfalls. But we were confident God would guide us through this process. This process took almost a year, and then one day we received the call that we were approved for a little girl who was found abandoned at a police station and currently in an orphanage. When asked if we wanted to adopt, the answer was yes. The adoption agency, we needed to consider a name for our new daughter. She was given a Korean name, Pak Kum Suk, and we had the option of using any part of that name, such as Kim. But we wanted to have a name that identified her as our child. We came up with the name Rebecca, the biblical meaning of which is captivating beauty, or to tie or to bind. This little girl would be the one who would bind us into a new family relationship, and we knew she would have captivating beauty in our eyes. When the day came when her flight came into JFK Airport, we were there in anticipation of new happiness. The representative from the agency brought our 3-month-old daughter off the plane, handed her to Ruth Ann, and introduced us to Pak. We both said to the agent that this is our Rebecca, and believe it or not, we got a smile as we looked at her little face. Thus began my father-daughter relationship with Rebecca. The name became important to me. In fact, at her baptism, when the pastor asked us at the point of the baptism, what name are you giving your child? I was overjoyed as we both said, Rebecca Ann. Rebecca came from one with no family in Korea to a new family in America. And her name tied that relationship to us, and her beauty captivated us over the years that she has been our daughter. God provided us with a blessing of happiness and joy with this new daughter, even after going through the many ups and downs of the adoption process. We were now a complete family through the blessing of God. Much like Job, God blessed him by providing him joy, peace, assurance, and strength. These are the spiritual blessings that come through weathering a storm in the presence of God. Job was able to enjoy the beauty of the world through the blessings that God bestowed upon him. We must remember that we, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we too have a name that God has provided for us at our birth, a name that God remembers as we walk by faith in our life journey, a journey that in which we live in the reality of God's presence, facing all the risk of life with hope and engendering a life of gratitude and thankfulness.